Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well. Hey there, everybody. Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that I'm going to be taking a break from the podcast through the month of August. So there won't be any new episodes of Swamp Thing during that time. I just felt like I needed a little break for a minute, so figured I'd take a month off and kind of recharge the batteries. But don't worry, I will be back at it in September. And in case you didn't know, I do have another podcast, the Hellblazer podcast, and that's doing the same thing where I'm reading through all the issues. So you can go check that out because those are actually all Patreon episodes that I'm doing for free. So I'm still going to release those because I already have them recorded. And I'll link that in the show notes, but you should be able to find it on any podcast app under the name John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. And just so you know, I'm not going to stop doing the Patreon episodes because our patrons pay for those. So I'll still do the normal Hellblazer one that's like way ahead of the free version. And we're going to be reading Men in Black for the exclusive Patreon podcast. So if you have any interest in that, you can go to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you will get access to every issue of Hellblazer I've done so far. I believe we're on issue 79 as of the last week. And you'll also get access to all the exclusive episodes library as well. So thank you once again for listening. I love you all. I really appreciate it. And with that, let's get into the issue. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 146, and just a little catch up on what happened in the last issue. Swamp Thing is heading to Europe because he's being pushed there by three mysterious gentlemen. They're obviously mystical, but we don't know why they want Swamp Thing there, other than they know he's supposed to fight, and this is something that's been in the works for what seems like thousands of years. And the reason why Swamp Thing is going there is because he thinks he's going to be able to finally take on the Parliament of Trees and fight them, and I guess either kill them or make them realize they need to stop bothering him. So on his way to the Black Forest in Germany, where that fight's going to go down, he's stopping in Holland because he was given a card by a demon a couple issues back that had the name and location of a prostitute on it, and the name of that prostitute was Linda Holland, who is Swamp Thing's first wife who died in issue 1 of Swamp Thing. So Swamp Thing doesn't know what's going on, but he's definitely curious enough to check it out. So he took a flight to Amsterdam to stop there, and just as they were getting over the Netherlands airspace, the plane was attacked by the Green. We saw a Brussels sprout fall off of a man's plate from the in-flight meal, and it turned into a giant plant monster that began running around and killing everybody. Also, everybody's gut flora began to sprout, so they all were dying from the inside as well as the plants burst out of them. And last we saw in issue 145, the plane exploded in mid-air, and we're not yet sure if anybody survived that explosion. Also in the background, the government has been tracking down Swamp Thing. They have hired a big game hunter named Nelson Strong to hunt him down, and they've hinted that he is some kind of champion of the Parliament of Stones. And that is where we left off in the last issue. So first things first, with issue 146, we got the cover. We see a room that has very bloody walls, and there is a woman turning on a light switch. We can see she's wearing a very, very tight black dress with long black gloves and fishnets, and she's looking out at us kind of evilly, but she doesn't have any like eyeballs in her eyes. It's just pure white inside of her eye sockets as she stares out at us. And overlaid off to the side, we see a giant Swamp Thing head that looks very evil and angry. It has fangs, and it is about to swallow up a very oddly shaped man who basically looks like a rectangle, the way that they've drawn his body, but they've like put, a line where the middle of his legs would be, and then his arms are coming out of the sides of the long side of the rectangle, and his face is very grotesque and distorted. And there's another rectangular person next to him that looks like an old woman, and she is wearing lingerie, and her face and body are looking pretty horrific. Her hands are also covered in blood. And we see on the cover that this is written by Mark Miller with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMulder. And we start off on the first page in Amsterdam, Holland, where we see three men walking through the red light district. And as they look into the windows of the prostitutes, one of them says, "Come on, darling. Any old whore can show a bit of tit. We want to see your cuts and bruises." And then in the next panel, we see them really close to a window, and they're speaking to a specific woman who looks a lot like Linda Holland from issue 1 of Swamp Thing, except she has a lot of scarring on her body, lots of scars that look like they're made by knives or sharp objects. And as she's dancing in the window, she's removing her top, and we can see that she's in like fishnets and panties. And all three men have alcohol in their hands, and one of the other guys says, "Jesus freaking Christ, check out those scars. I'm getting hard just looking at them. And the first man says, go for it, my son. Get stuck in there. And the second man replies, you must be joking, mate. You don't know where she's been. Supposing I catch the friggin' pox. But teasingly, the woman actually brings her shirt back up and covers her breasts, and then she seductively calls him into the room with her finger. And they all see this, so the first man kicks the second man in the butt and says, don't be such a prick. She's gagging for it, Stevie boy. But the second man, Stevie, tries to protest, saying, I'm pissed as a fart. But the third man goads him on, saying, shut your mouth and get in there, you arsehole. So Stevie goes up the steps and he walks through the front door, which only leads to a single room that's got a bed and a couch in it, and of course the window she was dancing in. So as Stevie walks in, he sees the woman is sitting on the bed, and he says, shit, I don't freaking believe this. And then he walks over to the blinds and he shuts them so that his friends can't watch anything. And as he does this, they're cheering him on. And then Stevie goes to sit down on the couch in the room, and the woman on the bed says, don't be scared, sweetheart. Everything's going to be just fine. What's your name? And Stevie nervously replies, Stevie Chambers. I'm just here for the weekend with me mates. And the nervousness seems to really be getting to him, because then he says, look, I don't mean to piss you about or anything, but I feel a bit sick, you know? I've been drinking since lunchtime and I think I'm going to puke. But the woman just stands up and begins to undress fully. And then as she gets naked, she says, don't worry, Stevie. We'll take things nice and easy. Maybe you should start with the bottle. It's always best to use something you're familiar with if it's your first time. So Stevie stands up and he grabs the bottle by the neck and he smashes the butt of it on the wall, leaving the bottom all broken shards and the neck as a handle. And then he moves towards the woman, and she doesn't seem scared or anything. She just says, now let's get down to business. You might find it easier if I put the light out. So she moves towards the lamp in the room, and as Stevie approaches her with the broken bottle, he says, before we start, can you tell me your name? And then she clicks off the light, and we get 2 panels of darkness where we hear her say, my name's Linda, sweetheart. Linda Holland. And then as we turn the page, we cut to the wreckage from the plane crash in last issue, and the mysterious old traveler is looking at the carnage of dead people on the ground. The fuselage and plane is completely torn up and burning, and there's just lots of debris scattered everywhere. And we see the name of this issue is Murder in the Dark. Then we cut to sometime later as the government arrives on the scene, and we see Colonel Nelson Strong standing in the middle of the wreckage and dead bodies, and Major North is approaching him. But Colonel Strong doesn't really pay attention to him. He's actually looking at a smoldering card of the flight safety instructions, but his concentration is broken as he hears Major North say, Cable, Mr. Matthew Cable. And Nelson Strong says, did you say something? And Major North says, we're gaining ground on this swamp monster, Colonel Strong. One of the passengers who boarded this plane correlates with our Swamp Thing file. And then he hands Colonel Strong a piece of paper that has the picture and description of Matthew Cable on it. And he says, Matthew Cable, 6 feet tall, black hair, blue eyes, and medium build. Former employee of the U.S. government and former member of the human race. Cable died 5 years ago, Colonel Strong. The empaths believe the Swamp Thing has somehow assumed his identity. And then Colonel Strong gets very angry and he crushes the paper in his hands and he says, he's not going to look much like this after the plane crash, Major North. I think I can wipe my ass with your big discovery. And Major North, I guess, kind of has to ignore that, so he says, you'd better get back in the convoy, Colonel. We're pulling out of Amsterdam. Nobody can trace the monster for miles around. The empaths reckon he's heading for Germany. But Colonel Strong looks at Major North and says, screw those empaths. Those gays don't know squat. Except he doesn't say gays. He says a very derogatory word for gay people. And Major North tries to protest against this, saying, but we've got roadblocks set up across the German border. This could be our one big chance. Then very forcefully, Colonel Strong says, we're staying in Amsterdam, asshole. Don't make me repeat myself. I want traps set up in the city center. He's going to surface soon. I can feel it in my bones. And then Colonel Strong pulls out a vial of pills and he pours some kind of medication in his palm. And as he does this, a very dejected Major North says, whatever you say, Colonel Strong, just don't lose your head. And Colonel Strong replies, I don't intend to, Major. And then he pops all the pills in his mouth and swallows, and he continues, in fact, I plan to collect one. Then we cut back to Amsterdam in the red light district in front of Linda's room. And someone is yelling on the streets, Linda! Linda Holland! Then we cut to the inside of Linda's flat where she is sleeping, and the yelling has woken her up, so she's saying, shit, my head. Feels like the wounds haven't healed yet. And she again hears someone yell Linda outside of her window. So she turns the lights on and sits up in bed. And we can see that her whole bed is covered in blood, all her sheets and bed frame and even the walls behind it. And as Linda sits up to move towards the window, she says, all right, I'm coming for Christ's sake. And she walks over to the window and opens the curtains, and she's surprised that the person yelling is right in front of her window, so she says, Jesus! But she doesn't call out just because of that. She also calls out because the man who's screaming is obviously Swamp Thing, but he hasn't been able to fix his face, I guess, since the plane crash, because he still has Matt Cable's body, but instead of like plant stubble coming out of his face and chin, now he's got like really big growths that are all over his face, including his eyebrows and his cheekbones and going into his eyes, which he doesn't have sunglasses for anymore. They're just bright red. So he is looking quite a mess and a bit like a monster. But he takes off his hat when he sees her and he says, please, let me in. I need to talk to you. And I guess she was just shocked initially at his looks because she walks over to the front door and opens it and says, I'm sorry. You just kind of gave me a fright. Come in. And then as they both walk in, she moves to her dressing table and takes off her big nightshirt, and she's wearing some lingerie underneath, and she starts putting on some lipstick and some makeup, and she says, grab a sweet, sweetheart. I won't be a minute. Excuse the mess. I don't usually see people this early. And we see Swamp Thing is standing behind her in the room, and he says, what is happening, Linda? Why are you here? And she turns to him kind of cheekily and says, well, I'm here to please you, Pumpkin. It's my job. God blessed me with a special gift, and I want to use it to make people happy. And then she turns to him even more and kind of shows her body off and says, nothing can kill me. I don't know why. I get murdered 5 times a night in this room, but I always wake up feeling fine. You're a lucky guy. I'm the most popular hooker in Holland. And upon hearing this, I guess the despair overwhelms Swamp Thing, and he sinks down to his knees on the ground and says, oh God, Linda. And she comes over to him and tries to pick him up, saying, hey, come on, baby, don't cry. You came here to have a good time. Just tell me your name and we can get down to business. And Swamp Thing looks at her and says, my name is Alec Holland. I was your husband a long time ago. And then she jerks back in surprise and says, Alec, sweet Jesus. But then she stands up and pulls out a cigarette and says, you can't be Alec. That's impossible. Alec died in a fire nearly 20 years ago. And Swamp Thing stands up and he says, my essence survived, Linda. Everything I was is wrapped up in this human form. And then as she lights her cigarette, she says, you're wrong, buddy. Alec burned to death in a car accident. He died with that white-haired waitress he left me for. And upon hearing this, Swamp Thing is overwhelmed again, and he leans against the wall to like steady himself, and he buries his head in his arm as he says, oh God, Linda, it is you who died. I do not understand how you can be here. But then Linda just moves towards the bed like she's just continuing with this transaction, and she sits on it all seductively, and she spreads her legs, and she says, I already told you, Pumpkin, nothing can kill me. You can try for 50 krona, but I'll just get back up again. I can act dead if you want me to. Would you like that? Do you want me to lie still and stop breathing and pretend I'm a corpse? Just tell me what you want to do, Pumpkin. I'm easy. I'm here to make you happy. And at this, Swamp Thing is just broken. He looks at Linda and he says, a kiss, Linda. I would like one final kiss to say goodbye. And she sits up and kind of starts to laugh and says, a kiss? Sure, no problem. So she stands up and walks towards Swamp Thing. And as they move together, they kiss. And Swamp Thing whispers to her, hold me, Linda. Hold me tight. So she embraces him tightly. And then he embraces her and he begins to cry. And he says, I pray to God you are in heaven. I hope I am just losing my mind. And in the next panel, we see a zoomed out street view of her room, and we see the silhouette of them hugging. And then on the outside, we see a bunch of men walking the streets, looking into every window of all the other prostitutes. And we see there's signage that says live show 24 hours XXX, menagerie, barnyard lust, all nude, all dead, girls, boys, whatever. So this really just emphasizes the debauchery of this place. I mean, the fact that the most popular prostitute in this area is Linda because she lets people murder her is pretty messed up. Then we cut to the town square in the center of Amsterdam, and we see the government is loading up weapons and lights and stuff. And we see Colonel Strong is telling the men, be careful with that canister, soldier. You trip and fall, and everybody here freezes to death in 2 seconds flat. So it seems he's setting up some kind of liquid nitrogen trap for Swamp Thing. And Major North walks up to Colonel Strong as they're setting up, and he says, "Is this how you're going to kill the swamp monster, Colonel Strong? Are you going to freeze him?" And Colonel Strong replies, "Liquid nitrogen can only stall this bastard boy, but it should give me enough time to..." But he pauses as he sees an old Dutch woman walking down the street next to them with a shopping cart full of tulips. And I'm not sure if he just thought maybe that was going to be Swamp Thing or something, but he totally forgets what he was saying, and then he begins to light a pipe, and Major North says, "What's the matter, sir? Is something wrong?" And Colonel Strong replies, "No, everything's fine. I just felt a shiver run down my spine. I guess someone must have stepped over my grave." Then we cut back to the red light district, and we see Swamp Thing is walking the streets, and he is just horrified by everything he's seeing in each window. So as he walks, his narration says, "My reasoning has been clouded by panic and fear. I should have realized that this predicament is merely a hallucination. I am the swamp god, at peace in the bayous. Linda Holland is dead. I spent what little money I had left on any narcotics I could buy. It is essential that I escape this reality. I want to be a god again. I want things to be as they were." So as he's spiraling out high on drugs, he passes by one of the prostitutes' windows, and the woman inside says, "Excuse me, mister, are you looking for a few laughs?" And as he turns to see her, we see an extremely emaciated woman who looks like she's starving to death. And as she removes her clothes in front of him, she says, "I haven't eaten in months. I really need the money." But when he doesn't say anything, she gets closer to the window and she holds her hands up, and we see that she's missing the tops of each of her fingers. And she says, "Don't ignore me, man. I've only gnawed down to the knuckle. I still know a few tricks." And upon seeing this, Swamp Thing immediately begins to vomit on the wall underneath the window. And then as he's wiping his mouth off, someone comes up and says, "Hey, buddy, are you okay? You don't look so good." And as Swamp Thing looks up, he sees the man's face, and it is completely distorted. He is wearing like normal clothes, like a hat that says "Kiss Me, I'm Irish," and a green jacket and slacks, but his face is completely mushed as if it's made of putty, and someone has taken their thumbs and just pressed in every detail and made his face askew. So Swamp Thing looks at him and says, "Dear God, what are you?" And the man looks down at him and says, "What are you talking about, man? I'm a tourist, just like you. I know my face looks a little weird, but the doctor gave me this special cream. He said I just got this rare type of syphilis. Nothing to worry about." And I'm not sure if this guy is real or if this is a hallucination, but Swamp Thing tries to run away saying, "I am sorry. I need to go." But the man reaches after him and tries to grab his coat saying, "Don't go. You're the first person I've seen since I got here. I've been kind of depressed recently, and the doctor said a holiday might be good for me. I thought maybe we could grab a beer and fool around a little." But luckily for Swamp Thing, he is able to get some distance between this man and him, and he yells, "Please, go away. Just leave me alone." And luckily for Swamp Thing, the man doesn't try to chase after him, but he does stand there creepily and he says, "Come on, big fella. I'll try not to bite." And as we turn the page, Swamp Thing continues running down the red light district sidewalks, and he's looking at, once again, all the debauchery and all the windows and all the clubs and everything. And his narration says, "I look in a window and I see 6 men standing around a bed, licking their lips. A glove flaps and turns on the mistress. No, not a glove." And what Swamp Thing realizes he's seeing is a fish that's out of water flapping around, and all the people are looking at it with smiles on their faces. So I guess they're just watching a fish die, or maybe they're going to use the fish in some kind of sexual act. And Swamp Thing's narration continues. "Every window is a looking glass into a new atrocity, a list of perversions without number. I must get away from this terrible place. I must find some shelter of sanity." And just as he thinks this, he walks by a movie theater, and the usher comes out and says, "Step this way, sir. Our movie presentation is about to begin." And the billboard behind the usher says what the name of the movie is, and it's called Wound Lovers. So based on the location of this theater and the stuff we've already seen, I'm going to assume this is not a normal movie. But Swamp Thing does listen to the man, and he walks into the theater. And as he walks in, we see the screen says, in big bold letters, "Happy Families." And then there's a subtitle that says, "Erotic Thriller The Tempter." And as Swamp Thing finds a seat, his narration says, "A couple of hours in the dark A few moments to collect my thoughts. Perhaps this is what I need. So as he sits down, the movie starts, and the first image on the screen is a family of 3 eating dinner. There's a husband, a wife, and a son. But this literally looks like a scene from Hellraiser because all of them have, I guess, cords or hooks or something, all digging into their skin, around their eyes and mouths and arms. And it seems like maybe they're being like moved like marionettes or something, but they do look in pain because we can see tears in their eyes. So as this scene plays out, Swamp Thing's narration says, "The movie begins and a hush falls across the hall. The soundtrack crackles, barely audible, in a language I do not recognize. The audience is becoming aroused. All around me, belts are unfastened and I hear a sigh as beer guts are released. The person sitting next to me is masturbating. Cold fingers brush the back of my neck, and I feel a hand on my thigh." And Swamp Thing kind of jerks forward at this, and his narration continues saying, "Oh God, I don't want to be here. Make it stop. Make it stop." Then we cut to what looks like a cafe, and we see the mysterious old traveler is sitting at a table, and he's doing a crossword puzzle, and he reads one of the clues saying out loud, "The copy or reproduction of a genuine article. 9 letters." And as he ponders that, we see a woman walk up, and it is in fact Linda Holland, the prostitute. But she's all dressed because this is not in her room, this is outside. And she says to the old traveler, "I'm ready to go back, traveler. The task you made for me has been completed." And the old traveler replies, "I did not create you, little thing. I merely added a 3rd dimension to your flat existence. I breathed life and color into your gray cheeks and gave you form." And then Linda replies, "This world is too uncertain, traveler. It frightens me. I want to go home." And the traveler says, "Very well, little thing. Take a final breath and close your eyes." And as she does that, the stranger looks at his newspaper, and we see this is the same newspaper that he had in last issue that had the article on the deaths of Linda and Alec Holland. And there was a picture of Alec and Linda in that article, but where before there were both of them, now there's just Alec Holland. But as she closes her eyes and holds her breath, we see her figure appear in the image next to Alec again. So it seems the old traveler was able to make a 3D construct of her just from her picture in the newspaper, which was why she was unable to die before. So once her image is completely back in the newspaper, he looks at the crossword again and he says, "The copy or reproduction of a genuine article. 9 letters. Ah." And then we see him fill out the word imitation, which is obviously an allusion to what the paper version of Linda Holland was. Then we come back to Swamp Thing, and now he seems to be in some kind of bar. It seems less sleazy, at least, than the movie theater that he was at, but there are still girls dancing in cages. It just seems like a fully nude version of a go-go bar. And a woman is approaching Swamp Thing, and she doesn't look like she works there. She looks like she is a patron, and she says, "You look like you could use a little company. Do you mind if I sit down?" And we can only see the back of Swamp Thing, and weirdly, he doesn't say anything as she begins to sit down. And she continues, "I saw you at the porn theater across the street, and I wondered how you liked the movie. I've been a fan of The Tempter since I was a little kid." Then we cut to a panel of the front of Swamp Thing, and he's literally just sitting in a chair, spazzing out, going, "Ugh, ugh." And there's like drool coming out of his mouth, and his eyes are like wide open, but it seems like he's having trouble controlling his body. But even though he looks like this, she just thinks he's on drugs or something. And she says, "Jesus, you look totally wrecked. What the hell have you been on?" And Swamp Thing actually gains control enough to say, "Mind. Can't concentrate." And then she puts her hand on top of his hand and says, "It's a beautiful night, you know. Far too nice to spend on your own. I've got a room just around the corner." But she's cut off as vines begin to sprout out from his hand and grab her wrist. And then as more vines shoot out from Swamp Thing's body and begin to wrap around her more, Swamp Thing yells out, "Get away! Run!" But she can't really move. Now she's completely wrapped in vines, and she yells, "Jesus Christ, what are you doing to my hand?" But Swamp Thing can't respond anymore. His body begins to sprout hundreds of vines, and his Matthew Cable face completely goes away as he completely morphs into his Swamp Thing body. But it seems he is not able to control this. And as the vines begin to attack the other patrons, they yell out, "Shit, look out!" And then as we turn the page, we see there's a giant explosion coming from the bar. Then we cut to Colonel Strong and the military, and the explosion has definitely alerted them because Major North is saying, "What the hell was that?" And Colonel Strong replies, "It sounded like a gas main. less than a block away. And then the military people rush to the area of the bar. And as they arrive on scene, they see firefighters fighting the flames. And Colonel Strong yells to his men, "Come on, move it! These people need help!" So the soldiers follow his orders and begin helping people get out of the burning building. And as they do, one of them is saying, "It's still in there. People are stuck in there with that thing." And Colonel Strong looks into the flames intensely. Then we cut to the inside of the building, and this must be what Colonel Strong is seeing, because there's a bunch of people in the flames and vines wrapping around them, and you hear Swamp Thing yelling, "Help! Please, for the love of God, somebody help me!" And we see he kind of looks like the monstrous form of Swamp Thing from the beginning of the Mark Miller, Grant Morrison run, because he's got big claws on each hand and he's just tearing through people as they're on fire. And the vines that wrap around people actually have like rose spikes on them, so they definitely hurt a lot more than regular vines. And we see the woman that was talking to Swamp Thing is being choked by one of these spiked vines. And just as it looks like it's about to be the end of it for her, Colonel Strong kicks in the door and he yells to Swamp Thing, "I've got you, you bastard! After 50 long years, I've got you now!" And then he points his weapon at Swamp Thing, which looks also like a flamethrower, so it looks like he's going to burn Swamp Thing and the woman who is being choked. But that is the last panel of this issue, so we'll have to see if Colonel Strong is able to burn Swamp Thing and hopefully not kill the woman. But until then, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, at gmail.com. And until next time, remember to stay swampy.